Alright, so this is the last video for this lecture, so I'm going to finish out the slide deck and do a little bit of a demonstration. So picking up where I left off, AWS Firehose is more like Stream Analytics in that it actually can take the data, process the data, and push the data to something like S3. This is unlike Event Hubs, which must use Stream Analytics, or unlike Kinesis Streams, which must use a separate Firehose instance or some other consumer to move the data. So this actually takes the data and processes it and puts it somewhere. So in Azure, if we scroll way up here, we had this streaming pipeline, right? An IoT device, a watch, a car, a drilling rig, something producing data, sent data to Event Hubs, the message broker, that got picked up and processed with Stream Analytics and pushed to Power BI or a storage solution like SQL Server. So we could actually take the data and store it. In AWS, that pipeline looks more like the producer generating the data sends to Kinesis Streams, which is the message broker like Event Hubs. And then Kinesis Firehose picks the data up off of it, processes it, and puts it in S3 or in Redshift. So like Stream Analytics, Firehose supports SQL syntax for filtering, aggregating, or otherwise transforming the data. And if data were output to Redshift, a BI tool could be connected to automatically updating data. So you could take the data and output it to S3 or to Redshift and put a BI tool on the end of it. Amazon, as we remember, does make QuickSight. QuickSight, unlike Power BI, does not really work with streaming data. It does not automatically update visuals as the data updates. You would actually have to connect it to Redshift and refresh your dashboard or something like that. So AWS does have an IoT solution which supports bidirectional communication with sensors and devices. So it has an AWS IoT solution. And if you remember, like Azure's IoT hub, it can not only receive data, like sensor data from the devices, but it can also push out updates and keep digital twin information and basically synchronize and manage those devices. So AWS has Greengrass, which allows custom applications to be developed in the cloud and pushed to edge devices. So we talked a little bit about AWS Lambda, where we could write custom code and we could publish that code to Lambda and it would run it on something like a PaaS service, basically, where the users don't have to worry about updating the operating system or even versions of the whatever runtime is actually executing the code. AWS Lambda is what's called a serverless solution, where it just runs the code for you fairly automatically. And so Greengrass allows AWS Lambda code and the container to be pushed to edge devices, so we can write code, push it out to AWS, and then have that synchronized down to the sensors out at remote locations. So AWS can also manage their devices and their registrations like IoT Hub. So finally, credentials. So Azure generates two API keys. Again, API keys are the programmatic keys. So they are the passwords that applications use to communicate with our cloud services. Two of these get generated for most services, including Event Hub and the Blob storage. These are used to authenticate to the Blob account, Event Hub, or for machine learning models, they also have them. AWS doesn't generate keys per service. So Azure generates keys for some of these services. AWS doesn't. Instead, you create an account, a user account in IAM, and give it permissions to the service. And so in IAM, we would create a user for the custom application. We would give it permissions to S3 or whatever other solution it needed to talk to, Kinesis, something like that, and then generate a password for that user. And so that makes a lot more sense generally, because you would want different applications to have different permissions and to be able to manage those separately. Azure credentials are associated with the service or tool, and in AWS they're associated with the user or account. So AWS model is more sophisticated, it's more mature, and it offers more granular permissions, a control of permissions and keys. And so the ability to make one user account per custom application allows us to manage the passwords and permissions separately for all of our different software applications. Azure's, on the other hand, is easier to set up and operate, making it very easy to share access to a service or data set. So once we set up an event hub, the key just comes with it. And once we set up the blob storage account, it's the same way. And so it's very easy to get set up and share permissions, but it's much less sophisticated in that we might have a lot of users or applications sharing the same API keys. So some Azure services do support what are called service principals, and so these are basically application user accounts. They've just chosen to call them something different. And so Azure is moving towards the same model that AWS uses, which would be for one user account per application, and then for those to have permissions to the cloud resources, as opposed to the keys being attached to the cloud resource. And we'll see an example of that here in a minute. And so both of them are starting to use the same model. It's just taking a little bit of time. Anyway, so let's flip over to the lab. So I have some things set up in my Azure account. The very first thing I'm going to look at is one of these. If you go to developer.twitter.com, you can sign up for a free developer account if you want. And then you can actually generate API keys that let you talk to the Twitter API, basically to the Twitter service, and get data from it. And so I have two of these. So I have one here, and it is my application registration. You can see all my information here. And then on keys and tokens, you'll find 4 keys and API tokens that will allow you to communicate with the Twitter services. I'm actually going to look at these, and I can regenerate them later. So basically, here in a solution called Apache NiFi, which is an open source data movement tool, I have two. I've gone ahead and set this up, and I've got 2 different services here running. One which gets data from Twitter, and one which puts data on Azure's Event Hub. Let's see if this is still running real quick. Oh, there it goes. And so those 2 keys, or those 4 keys that you saw, I set right here. So I have a filter endpoint set up, and I put the customer key from Twitter right here, the secret right there, access token and access secret. And then I'm filtering on NBA, since I assume quite a few people are talking about the NBA right now. I am capturing anybody that has NBA anywhere in their tweets. And so this gets the data from Twitter, and this puts it on Azure's Event Hub. So we'll come back to that here in just a minute, but I'm going to go ahead and go back to the Azure portal. Let's refresh. And I'm actually going to create a new Event Hub. So I'm going to go ahead and create all of this. So I'm going to go to Create a Resource and Event Hubs. And so we see in Azure, it's a pretty straightforward process for creating things. Probably feels a little bit different than AWS, but overall it's all this service, or this wizard-based creation. So I'm going to call this Profit NBA. And we see I get a choice of pricing tier. I'm going to go with standard. Actually, I'm going to go with basic. And so these all just differ in how many connections I can have and what their maximum throughput is. And so here you see I only get 1 consumer group and 100 connections. You will probably only have 1 subscription. I have a couple. I'm going to select a sandbox resource and put it in West US. That we have a couple different regions. So these are exactly like the regions in AWS. They're just in slightly different places, right? But these are their groups. These are Microsoft's groups of data centers around the world. And then throughput units is just how much data can it push at a time, right? And so more throughput units equates to more, data throughput, right? You can see it's in units, not necessarily messages. So there's some kind of conversion there. And you see here in Azure, I get this little bell, and so it takes me back to where I started, and it shows me on my events that I have a deployment in progress. So while I wait on that, I'm actually going to create, if you think about it, I'm taking data from Twitter, and I'm putting on an Event Hub. Now I need a Stream Analytics service, right? So I'm going to create another, I'm going to go to Home, I'm going to go to Create a Resource, and look for Stream Analytics. And I'm going to go to Stream Analytics Job, and I'm going to create, and I'm going to call this Buffett NBA, put it in the same subscription, in my sandbox resource group. So in Azure, there are resource groups, and there's really not a similar concept to resource groups in AWS. And all resource groups is a way for me to bundle together the things that I've deployed. And so it's really just a way for me to keep track of things once I've put them in. It doesn't manage permissions. It doesn't manage any really thing else. It's just a convenient way for me to kind of find, locate, and maybe delete things, because I can delete entire resource groups. And so resource groups are just a way for me to put things for like a project or an application or a service or a solution all together in Azure, and kind of keep track of them all together. It also allows me to see the cost per resource group. So it's really just like a group. It's just like a bundling thing, right? A collection. It doesn't manage permissions or networking rules or anything like that. So you see here I also have the streaming units, and so basically this just gives me more resources for my query, and I can do this in the cloud or at the edge if I have an on-premise deployment. So I'm going to go ahead and create this also in West US. I wouldn't want to create this in a different region, because if I did create in a different region, it would cost me money. So you have to pay whenever you transfer things from one region to another. And so we see here my deployment of Buffett NBA succeeded, and so I can actually just click right there, and it'll take me to my resource. There we go. So this is my Event Hub. And so, so the Event Hub is really the overall service. It's what's called a namespace, an Event Hub's namespace, and this is just like the thing that I create topics in, right? And so here I would create multiple topics or hubs. So each hub is really like a topic. So I'm going to create one called NBA Tweets, and partitions is my throughput, right? The more partitions I have, the more I can parallelize the messages coming in, right? And each of those partitions has its own offset. So I'm going to leave it at 2 because I don't really get that much throughput from Twitter. And I'm going to click on that topic. And so again, these event hubs are like topics. And now I need a key to send data, right? So I've got my keys from Twitter. I can read the tweets. Now I need to actually publish the data back to Event Hub. So I'm going to go here to these shared access policies, which has the key on it, right? No surprise. And I'm going to add one. Basically, I'm going to create an API key or a password. And I'm going to call it NBA Tweets. And I'm going to allow it to listen, or I'm going to allow it to send. So this is going to send data to my Event Hub. And so now it's creating me my password. Here it is. And here's my key. And so I can take this key, go back to NiFi, and modify this. And so the Event Hub name was now NBA Tweets. And the Event Hub namespace was this Buffett NBA, right? Event Hub's namespace, NBA. And now I need to go back to that Event Hub, and I need to go back to the password I just created, the shared access policy, and I need to copy the key, and it's called NBA Tweets, and I have the password right there. All right. So now that I've updated that, I can start it. Let's see. There we go. It looks like it's processing some of those tweets. I'm just getting enough from Twitter that it's keeping it pretty busy. All right. So now I've got data. I should see data coming into this Event Hub. Oops, went back too far. I should see data start to come in here. Yep. So you can see here now it's receiving data. That's what I see here in the metrics. Let's see messages. So these requests basically mean an application's trying to talk to my Event Hub, and throughput. I don't see any of that yet. but I do see requests coming in, and I should start seeing messages pop up here. Yep, I see requests coming in. And so you see here I can set my retention, which by default is 1 day. So if we remember, these publish subscribe message brokers don't care if anybody reads the data, they just keep it for a set amount of time. And so I can modify this retention. I just pay more for the longer I keep the messages, right? And so by default, they're going to start getting deleted after receiving them for 1 day. And that's fine with me right now. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and go back here. And looks like my stream analytics job is still deploying. Yeah, looks like that's still deploying. So we're going to wait on that. While I do, I'm going to come back here to Twitter. And so it looks like I'm sending messages as fast as I can send them. There's a lot of people tweeting about the NBA right now. That's probably it. That's why I'm getting so many coming through. So sometimes it can take a few minutes to publish the data. There we go. So I see requests coming in. Looks like I have gotten 60, almost 70 messages, and my throughput is in data size there. So here, if I go to all services, I see everything available in Azure. I'm going to filter to stream analytics. And this is a stream analytics job I've created already. Let's go ahead and use that since I don't want to wait on the other one anymore. So again, stream analytics is actually what takes the messages and it processes them. And so whenever we start a stream analytics connection, right? Whenever we start stream analytics, we have inputs, we have a query, and we have outputs. And so my inputs are where I'm getting the data. That's my event hub that I'm getting the data off of. And the output in this case will be Power BI. And so we're going to take the data and we're going to run a simple query on it. And we're going to build a Power BI dashboard on the end of it, right? And so right now I'm waiting on this stream analytics job to stop, right? Because I was already running this one in the background. And then we're going to modify it to read from the event hub. So I'm taking the data. I'm using this free piece of software called Apache NiFi to get it off of Twitter, to put it on Event Hub, and now they're showing up in my Event Hub, and I'm going to pick them up, and I'm going to put them in a Power BI dashboard. So here I'm going to take the input, and I'm going to delete this one. This one was already here. I'm going to delete it. And so if you created a new one, you wouldn't have an input here, or you'd have a sample input, and so you'd need to come in here and add stream input and Event Hub right there. And you see that we have two other options. We have IoT Hub or blob storage. This is an alias. You can call it whatever you want. I'm going to call it NBA tweets. And it automatically looks for event hubs in the same subscription, right? And so it says, hey, look for all the other event hubs that are here in my Azure subscription. And so I'm going to select the Bruffett NBA. Was it? Portal. Let's go back to the Azure portal. NBA tweets should be the one getting data. Yep, NBA tweets. So I'm going to come back here to what namespace is this in? Bruffett NBA. Okay, so I want to connect it to Bruffett NBA. There we go. Yep, that's good. And I want to connect it to the NBA tweets. I'll use this shared access key, which already exists, and it's already filled in all the other information for me, and I can add my input. And so now it's reading from that event hub. It's outputting to Power BI. And so you see here we have a number of choices for where we send the data. We could send it to another event hub after processing it, to SQL, Blob, to another storage account, to different solutions we haven't talked about, but Service Bus is a message queue. Cosmos DB is a NoSQL data store, and there's Power BI. And so if you have a Power BI account, you can come in here and you can call it My Power BI. You have to authorize the connection, which basically means log in. Like if you happen to have it through OU or a company, you would log into your account there, right? So you'd say authorize, you'd log in. So I've already done that through my DVN credentials, but you would log in there, authorize to your Power BI account. and then call it. So in this case, it'd be like NBA and tweets. And so you can see here, I've already set one up. And this one is NBA tweets and NBA, right? And so I've already outputted as NBA output, authorized, and called my data set NBA tweets. And we'll see that here on the other side. All right, so now I've got my input, I've got my output, now I need to write a query. And so this is a custom syntax. So here, what I'm basically doing, so I can do a count star as count into NBA output, which is my output for Power BI, and I want to do it from NBA tweets. So NBA tweets is where the data is coming from, and then I'm sending it to the Power BI. And we'll see here we have a few different windowing functions. So this is just the Stream Analytics query language reference guide. And here we can see an example of how we do the group by. So if I do a count, I want to group it by something. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to group by tumbling window. And we remember the tumbling window is just where the windows don't overlap. And I want to do it by second. I'm going to do it every 5 seconds. And so this is going to count the number of tweets. It's going to send it to Power BI. It's going to get it from the event hub we just created. It is going to give me the number of tweets every 5 seconds, basically. And so I'm going to save that. Actually, let's test it. So if I click this little ellipsis right here, I can sample the data from the input. Let's do a 1 minute sample. And so what it's going to do is it's actually going to read from that event hub. And that way I can test this before I start it and deploy it to make sure I don't get an error. So we see here, looks like I've gotten over almost 2,000 messages since we've started. And so it keeps on sending data. I'm getting quite a few tweets. And presumably everybody's talking about the NBA right now. Looks like it's even having a hard time keeping up with the amount of data I'm getting from Twitter. So let's see, let's get my sample file here real quick. And then we'll test it and we'll see what the sample output looks like. All right, there we go. And so now I can test this. So I've got this little file icon, which means that it's loaded my sample data, and now I can test it. And so what it's doing is it's running this query on the sample data it just captured on that 1 minute set of data that it got. And we see here I got 495. So it didn't give me multiple different records. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to save it. It'll save my changes. That's fine. And now that it's saved, we will start this up. Start, yep, there we go, good. And so what this is doing is it is starting, and it will begin reading from that event hub and pushing to Power BI. Refresh. Well, we had data coming through. Let's see. Maybe it's just taking a minute to update. Looks like it's thinking about it. Your job is running. All right, let's see if we see something in Power BI. So I'm going to go here to Power BI. I'm going to go to My Workspace and Data Sets. You see I have a couple of different data sets, but one of them is the NBA tweets. And so if you recall, here in the outputs, we connected it to Power BI and I called it NBA Tweets. All right, so I have a data set here called NBA Tweets. What I'm going to do is this little icon right here says Create Reports. And again, this is just powerbi.com. You can get some version of Power BI for free and use it that way if you want. And so I went ahead and created this. So I've got the NBA data set, I've got the count. I should actually have the ability to create, there's this, and a tile, there we go, we see it updating. Let's see if I can actually create that again though. Let's create a dashboard, NBA tweets, there it goes, add a tile, okay. So I'm going to go here to add a tile. So again, you just need to go to, if you are trying to follow along, you just need to go to your workspace, create a dashboard, and then add a tile right here. And I'm going to go to custom streaming data and click next. We see here I have the NBA tweets data set already here for me. And I have a few different visualization types. I'm going to just do a card and select the only thing I'm sending, which was count, right? I was doing the number, this is the number of tweets every 5 seconds. So this should update about every 5 seconds. There it goes. There you go. So you see it updating every 5 seconds. That's probably the maximum throughput I'm getting right here. Is about 67 tweets. So that's obviously not the number that's really being tweeted every second or every 5 seconds about the NBA. I'm sure it's many thousands right now, but that's the most that I'm able to push using this current pipeline. And it's probably maxing out at about 65. So let's see if this job's showing any metrics. There we go. So we see some metrics. So we see that I'm processing 1,100 events total. So it's trying to push all those through. And then I'm just seeing that. So we could modify this query if we wanted and do a length like you saw here at the beginning, which would be the length of the tweets. But we have a number of ways to do that. And so now I can use SQL. I can use a number of the different windowing functions that we saw in the lecture and process those. And so this has been my example pipeline using the services that we talked about. I could also have saved this out for bulk analysis if we wanted. That does conclude the lecture. Thanks.